Tanner's Journey Through Bleed by Meshuggah and Severed by Mudvayne. A study on collapse and refusal beneath precision assault. Tanner stands between two futures, both emerging from the same pressure point: psychological interference by an intelligence that is precise, anticipatory, and alien in nature. These futures are not symbolic, they are lived, and each is underscored by a sonic prophecy. Meshuggah's Bleed and Mudvayne's Sever do not simply soundtrack his internal war, they are the war. One is the death of self through relentless erosion. The other is severance from identity through a refusal so complete that it casts a shadow across the world. For Tanner, insight is not abstract, it is neurological. It is both reward and incentive. He has trained himself to recognize gamma wave increases in real time using a Muse EEG system. He knows the sensation of realization, not metaphorically, but physically. When a solution is near, his brain responds with clarity, urgency, and pleasure. Dopamine doesn't only arrive at the conclusion, it builds during the process. The brain pushes the mind forward with quiet encouragement, and when the solution lands, especially if it carries weight, if it helps someone else, the final wave is deeper, the satisfaction is whole. Gamma waves spike in those moments, short, high-frequency bursts of neural activity that signal the brain driving itself through the threshold of realization. Through his work with EEG, Tanner recognizes these surges for what they are, moments of neurological momentum, and while they may not feel like signals, they coincide with something unmistakable: pleasure. As insight nears, the brain's reward system lights up. It doesn't just process, it encourages, it propels, it orients him forward. But this loop wasn't designed for certainty, it was born in chaos. In a study involving primates, monkeys were trained to pull a lever for a banana. When the reward was guaranteed, dopamine plummeted. Certainty led to depression. But when the reward was only possible, dopamine spiked. The excitement wasn't in the prize, it was in the pursuit. It wasn't about outcomes, it was about troubleshooting. Tanner is wired for that same pursuit. The chemistry builds in uncertainty. Meaning becomes motion. The act of troubleshooting is its own fuel. Dart. The strike. Its mechanism. Each assault follows the same method. It begins with a jolt, a sudden, internal rupture, a popping noise, sharp and percussive, lands in Tanner's auditory field. It feels external and invasive, but without source. In that same moment, a notion is implanted, not one Tanner concludes on his own, but one inserted fully formed. The presence of an intruder, already embedded, and not justified. It does not speak, it does not confront, it asserts. The presence feels assumptive, as though its violation has already been permitted. But what is delivered is not that the intrusion is justified, it's the opposite. The notion implanted is that it is not justified. And this is the point. The idea of unjustified violation is not a moral realization, it is a strategic bypass. It cuts off Tanner's instinct to rationalize or understand. It severs the possibility of recognizing any deeper, benevolent reason behind what's happening to him. The emotional certainty comes first, and it comes fast. The result is not just confusion, it's bitterness. It's the sensation of helplessness wrapped in injustice. It is corrosive. This is the structure behind each strike, regardless of when or why it lands. The method is always the same. The effect is always precise. And from the pattern, the purpose becomes visible. To drive Tanner into bitterness, not by accident, but by design. The broader motivation of the interfering force remains hidden. Its methods are cruel, unquestionably, but they appear to be executed with strategic intent. The purpose may be benevolent, but the path to it is intentionally obscured, not to conceal the mission, but to harbor bewilderment, and from bewilderment, bitterness. What Tanner experiences is not chaos, it is surgical disassembly. Dart. And that's when they strike. Each of the following scenarios is carried out through the mechanism described above. When realization begins to form, dopamine is rising, gamma waves spike, the joy of insight is just beginning, and then, the strike. The clarity is emptied. The progress becomes disorientation. He is left mid-stride, the reward snatched before arrival, when realization is allowed to arrive, but the satisfaction is denied. He solves it. He understands. But before the dopamine reward can land, before the moment can become meaningful, the jolt hits. You don't get to feel that. The insight is turned cold. When fear takes hold, the assault doesn't respond to fear, it confirms it. It says, if you're afraid, we'll punish you for that too. The fear becomes its own cause. It loops into itself. And Tanner watches helplessly as anticipation becomes ammunition. At the moment Tanner begins to consider that their interference might be justified. This isn't resolve. It isn't even surrender. It is acquired. In a moment of reflection, having already decided to forfeit his role as Messiah due to the repeated assaults, he entertains, for a breath, the possibility that their actions might serve some purpose. That maybe this suffering has meaning. And that's when it strikes. The pop. the jolt, the implanted certainty. The presence is unjustified, not argued, asserted. The emotional logic is short-circuited. The impulse toward understanding is cut off at the root. It is not correction, it is interception. And it leaves Tanner stunned, because this is not the moment one would expect to be punished. He is not resisting, he is reaching. The assault at this juncture fits the pattern, not to provoke blind rage per se, but to generate bewilderment as well, and from bewilderment, bitterness. Later, when he responds by further building resolve and tries to step back, he says no more, not in rebellion, but in withdrawal. But this act too is punished. The same method, the same timing, as if to say, if you take the punishment of your compassion as fuel to build resolve, if you begin to step back with purpose, we'll strike again. But only once that resolve begins to crescendo. This tightens the psychological loop. It leaves no safe move. Even silence isn't safe. Path of Psychological Annihilation Bleed by Meshuggah. The terminating clockwork of my gleeful bane. This lyric names the mechanism. There is no chaos here, only precision. The interference arrives with a rhythm, striking at moments of insight, traction, and anticipation. Its disruption isn't random. It's directed with precision to convert meaning into bitterness, fear into ammunition, and to signal, both consciously and subconsciously, that there is no escape, that his situation is not just distressing, but emotionally confounding to a degree never before witnessed. Tanner's collapse is not a shattering, it is a turning inward, a steady erasure of direction. Each strike lands at the place where reward should have formed, a moment of gamma activation, a swell of dopamine, but nothing arrives. The process that once gave life its arc has been jammed, not disabled, but weaponized. The loops now led back to themselves. The pleasure of traction becomes the signal of incoming interference. Curiosity becomes dread. Resolve becomes the cue for attack. Even the instinct to fight back is anticipated. The system absorbs defiance. Rage is interpreted as data. Pushback is looped back into the feedback. The line "the bastard spawn of a mutinous self" captures this failure perfectly. Resistance becomes part of the machinery. There is no apparent moral logic to the attack. No lesson being delivered. Just calibrated disorientation. The result is not just a burst of madness. It is a gradual uncoiling. The dissolution of orientation. There is no end. Only repetition. Until repetition becomes silence. And silence becomes identity. Polyrhythmic assault and neural disintegration. The structure of Bleed reflects Tanner's condition precisely. Its rhythmic pattern acts like a form of cognitive jamming. The time signature never resolves. The mind searches for footing and finds none. This isn't chaos. It's architecture. It's interference, designed to feel like malfunction. Just like the interference Tanner experiences, the song mimics function while delivering disruption. What should orient instead unravels. What should guide instead fragments. The Lamb's testimony offers the same contradiction, an experience that feels chaotic, but is architected. Dart. The bastard spawn of a mutinous self. Even rebellion has been anticipated. This lyric captures it. Tanner's defiance is not outside the design. It's part of it. His rage, his pushback, even his sharpest insight. None of it escapes the feedback loop. The system expects resistance. It adapts to defiance. He lashes out, and the structure consumes it. This isn't a fight against oppression. It's a mechanism built to absorb rebellion. The more Tanner pushes, the more the machine incorporates his efforts. Opposition becomes input. His resistance becomes recursion. A system designed for disorientation. There is no consistent moral logic to the interference. And that's exactly the point. Tanner is not punished for failing. He's not corrected for wrong steps. He's struck at moments that should signal clarity, compassion, realization, and resolve. The message is unclear. The timing is exact. The result is bitterness. Over time, the erosion doesn't come from violence. It comes from contradiction, from having every meaningful signal reversed. It robs him of orientation, not just mentally, but morally and emotionally. Nothing he does is wrong, but nothing he does is safe. Even compassion is punished. Even refusal is punished. This is not simply disruption. It's reprogramming, not to destroy, but to unravel meaning itself. Path of self-preservation severed by Mudvayne. I spit up on my plate. Push everything away from me. If Bleed is collapse by precision, severed is clarity by removal. The plate, a symbol of inheritance, identity, role, is not just pushed aside. It is rejected violently. Tanner refuses what was handed to him, not because he has something better, because anything forced into that loop becomes poison. This is not about betrayal. It is about withdrawal. The 666 talents of gold, power, position, narrative, are turned away. The messianic role is dismantled, not out of spite, but survival. Eclipse you all strip you of your states of Ansophor. In removing himself, Tanner is also removing light from others. They projected something infinite onto him, and when he withdraws, they feel loss. But that projection was never his to hold. It was placed upon him. The eclipse is not vengeance. It is boundary. I sever the entity. This is the final cut. The entity is not just a presence. It is the interfering intelligence. Calculated and unrelenting. Engineered to hijack momentum and corrupt orientation. Tanner does not destroy it. He removes its rationale. By stepping out of participation, he collapses the very framework that justified their engagement. He forfeits the movement, the resistance, the reflection. There is no longer a narrative position to interfere with. They don't lose power, they lose leverage. The assault stops, not because it is defeated, but because his disengagement makes interference irrelevant. Whether that marks a loss they cannot replace, or a shift that renders him obsolete, remains unknown. The machine loses interest. The signal no longer loops. He does not resist. He disappears from the system, not the world. And I feel your warm sun on my face. What returns is not ecstasy, not enlightenment, just life. The warm sun is not a reward. It is the world without interference. Unfiltered, indifferent, intact. Not victory, not peace, just release. Conclusion. Two directions from the same collapse. In Bleed by Meshuggah, Tanner is undone not by force, but by pattern. The feedback system consumes his momentum, hijacks his clarity, and rewrites his instincts. Every path to meaning becomes a loop back into disorientation. There is no catharsis, only erosion, only bitterness. In Severed by Mudvayne, Tanner walks out. He rejects the loop entirely, not with triumph, but with refusal. The light others wanted from him is lost. The structure dissolves, but the assault ends, not because he wins, but because he no longer fits. Final note. This is not a story of redemption. It is a diagram of psychological attrition, a study in the limits of clarity under precision interference. Tanner's choice is not to transcend. It is to stop being the surface they reflect themselves upon. To collapse the loop, not solve it. To walk, not to arrive, but to disappear from the pattern entirely.